Hello, and welcome to Google's DC office. My name is Steve Grove, and I'm the News and Political Director at YouTube. And welcome this morning. We're glad to have you here with us today for another Google DC talk. This is actually the third in a three-part series that we're running on the what's that? Oh, it's the second in a three-part series. I'm not in San Bruno usually, so I don't keep track of the DC office as well as I probably should. But this is the second in a three-part series on technology policy and the next administration and the 111th Congress. What are the possibilities? What are the challenges? And we're gathering experts from all over the technology sector to discuss these things. And we have four great experts here today, which we'll introduce to you in just a second. Just a few quick notes about today's panels. There are actually two of them. The first one, we're going to focus on sort of the lessons from the campaign trail in transparency, accountability, and participation. And in the second panel, which will be moderated by my colleague Andrew McLaughlin, who works here at Google but is actually doing a stint on the presidential transition team right now, but was kind enough to join us this morning. He'll be doing a panel on technology policy and some of the challenges and opportunities there moving forward. A few quick notes on the format. We'll kick things off with a few Q&As here. We'll be taking questions from the screen over there, where we'll be playing some Google Moderator questions. This is a new platform we developed where people can submit questions online and vote the ones that they think are the most important up to the top. So we'll take a few of those, and then we want this to be a discussion, so we'll open it up to the crowd as well at the end. So let me just say a few brief comments to set us up here, and then we'll turn it over to the experts we've brought today to do the real discussion. I think everyone in this room certainly knows that this campaign saw amazing innovation in the use of technology to increase transparency, create new opportunities for accountability, and increase participation in the political process. In the realm of participation, we saw over $500,000 raised online by the Obama campaign, for example. On mybarackobama.com, 200,000 offline events were planned using the internet, and 400,000 blog posts were written by more than 35,000 volunteer groups across the country. And the RNC got into the game too. They put their party platform online and received over 13,000 comments on the party platform, which is sort of a boring piece of party material that 13,000 people in the country in a couple of days commented on. They listened to that and incorporated it into their approach. We also saw a new level of transparency and a new thirst for transparency in this campaign. 40% of online Americans in this election wanted to get primary source documentation of what was taking place in the campaign from the internet. Videos, blog posts from the campaign, policy papers. 40% of people online actually got primary information from these campaign websites. And in the realm of accountability, anecdotally, members of the press tell us that this is actually the first election where they felt outmanned by the campaigns, where they simply couldn't keep up with the content machine that was the political campaigns this year. And so we saw citizens actually come up and fill that gap in some interesting ways, but ways that actually brought up new challenges, and that the way that citizens hold their governments accountable is certainly different than the way that journalists do. We want to discuss some of that this morning. But the big question I think here is we saw some transparency and participation and accountability in the campaign, but how does that apply to governance? And to help us think about that question today, we have four experts in the panel, which I'll introduce, and then we'll let them give some of their reflections. On the far end, we have Jeff Eller. He's the president and CEO of Public Strategies, where he coordinates media, lobbying, and communication strategies for several leading corporations in high-profile crisis situations. Before joining Public Strategies, Eller served at the Clinton White House as Deputy Assistant to the President and Director of Media Affairs, staging presidential news conferences, administration interviews, and other major media events while attempting to post some of this information online in the Internet's early years. Sam Graham-Felsen, sitting next to him, was the Director of Blogging and Blog Outreach for the Obama campaign. 400,000 blog posts, Sam, by people affiliated with the Obama campaign in some way or another. He also produced online videos to the campaign, and prior to the Obama campaign, he worked at The Nation and did some video work for Current TV. Next to Sam is Cyrus Krohn, who was the director of the Republican National Committee's e-campaign division. He joined the RNC following 2 years at Yahoo as director of content production and election strategy, and before that was the publisher of Slate magazine. And finally, sitting next to me is Buffy Wicks, who was the California field director for the primary and the Missouri state director for the general election for the Obama campaign. Her specialty was organizing, and we'll talk about that today. Before the Obama campaign, she worked for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. So welcome to our panel today. Thank you for joining us. I should mention that in addition to being live, we're also on video. This will be posted to YouTube a bit later today. Sam, we'll start with you, and I want to talk a little bit about transparency in politics and also the ways in which the internet is different from traditional mediums. Is there a sense that technology is just making the process of communication more efficient, or is there something different about the way that the internet works that actually changes the way that campaigns and people communicate with each other?
Thanks. Can folks hear me?
Is there a...
My other mic is here.
There we go.
All right. Hi. First of all, can I ask how many folks in this audience watched a video from the BarackObama.com YouTube channel? All right. So looks like almost everyone. We had, I believe, Steve, you probably know the stats better than me, but around 100 million views. If you add that all up, it came out to about 1 billion seconds of our footage consumed. If you sat in front of a computer, you would have to spend 2,000 years to watch all of that. We produced about 1,800 videos throughout the course of the campaign. In terms of efficiency, I think when you create such a breadth of types of videos, we created short videos that were funny. We created 25-minute documentary-style videos about a single supporter. We created all sorts of constituency videos. When you create that many videos, there's almost something for everybody out there. There was something for, my mom to send a YouTube link to her friends and relatives because there was a video that she specifically connected with. Maybe it was the Women for Obama video that we made. We just made so many different types of videos that there was the efficiency of folks finding something that they personally connected to and then giving their personal stamp of endorsement of sending it to a friend or relative. Whereas that's a lot different from watching a TV ad that you don't necessarily want to watch on TV. Getting that personal stamp of endorsement. Just quickly also, one thing that we did, which I think was unique on this campaign, was we towards the end, in the general election, we Ustreamed, meaning we live streamed virtually every Obama and Biden event, the full event, not just the stump speech, but the Q&A session afterwards. And we gave our supporters, access to see, what folks were asking in Ohio versus New Mexico. And, I think that was a really interesting new step that we took. And just lastly, one of the things we found interesting was folks were actually hungry for the longer content. Even though they're watching on this small screen, if there was, in-depth, content, they wanted to see it. So they actually asked us to start showing full events, and that's what prompted us to start Ustreaming everything.
You mentioned that you're pushing out a lot of content, be it video, be it blogs. You're also getting a lot of content in. Was the campaign listening to what people were saying online and submitting online through comments or emails or rankings or other things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was hard for us to respond to all the comments on the blog. I mean, we would have thousands of comments, within a couple hours of posting something. But we were constantly asking folks to send, pictures and share their stories. It worked a little bit better, I think, in the text than in the citizen video stuff. But one of the things that we did on the campaign was a huge amount of our content wasn't even really focused on Barack Obama as much as it was on our supporters. If you go back and look at our blog, maybe even half of the content on there was profiles of our supporters, folks either sharing their stories directly. We put the email address of our blog right up there, so anyone could contact us at any time. So we were definitely listening, to as much as we could. And if folks on our other platforms like MySpace and Facebook, we had a dedicated volunteer squad that would reply to every message and question that was sent in. Those folks were working around the clock on that
Volunteers.
stuff. Yeah.
Buffy, you were the state director of California during the primary, and you were telling me that you had 9 paid staff for the whole state. So obviously you rely on volunteers. Talk a bit about how in the heck you managed to stay with 9 people, and to the extent that technology played a role, tell us what you learned.
One, thanks everyone for having me. I feel very hip at Google. So I was in California as the field director, and the problem that we had, I originally started the campaign in March of 2007, and I actually had 14 states in the West. And literally hundreds of thousands of emails and phone calls of people that wanted to get engaged in the campaign, and it was me. So I quickly realized that I needed to develop an infrastructure of leadership out in these communities, and most importantly, we needed to develop online technologies to give people access to the campaign and to really empower themselves. And I think this cycle and this campaign and this presidential campaign was completely revolutionary when it comes to bringing online technologies and newer technologies with traditional organizing. And it made it really a perfect marriage. When I was deployed out to California, our national field director said, okay, there's 7 staff, good luck. You know, there's 53 congressional districts. And just to give you a comparison, when I was in Missouri, I had about 250 staff. Which is a much smaller state. So in California, fortunately, California is somewhat of a hotbed of innovation, and there was a lot of our volunteers that happened to work at places like Google and you know, in newer technologies, and were pretty innovative. And we were able to develop some online calling tools and train folks on how to use the voter file and get them really, really engaged in the campaign in an honest way. And it takes really the newer technologies with the traditional organizing. We created a teams model of organizing where we developed neighborhood organizing teams, and those were comprised of roughly 5 to 6 people in each team in each neighborhood across the state. And one of those people was a data manager, and their whole job was to manage the data flow of the voter file and be responsible for it. And you know, some of the main points that I want to touch on that made that work were, one, the transparency. You know, we gave a neighborhood, okay, these are your 10 precincts. You're responsible for them. This is how you write a field plan. If you want to talk to, you know, if your vote goal is 2,000 people, that means you need to talk to 10,000 people. This is how you get there if you can talk to, you know, 20 people per hour. So we walked them through the whole process, but most importantly, we gave them the access to those lists. And that's a very new...
How did you decide to do that? Because, I mean, a voter file is a sensitive piece of information. Did you just open that up to volunteers to contact each other? I mean, was that a risk in your mind?
You know, and that's, I think, a departure in politics. I think that's how people used to think about it, even I think 4 years ago. But, you know, our thinking was, you know, it takes a lot to organize. And maybe, yes, there's going to be some of the opponents that come onto the website or use the calling tool, but that's the risk that you take, because we knew that the one strength that we had were thousands of people that wanted to get engaged in the campaign. And that overrode any potential negatives that may come of anyone else accessing the voter file. So our theory was, you know, here's the keys, you're driving. Go forth and organize. And so it really was sort of an open source feel, but also a sense of accountability. Every night, I would look on the voter file and I would see the numbers click in of all the calls that were being made. And we would do tens of thousands of calls every single night. You know, and I could see which teams were making calls, which teams weren't making calls. I knew exactly what was going on in every single community in California. And we had limited staff.
Did that openness ever come back to bite you in any way?
No, I mean, the cool thing about it is after I left California, I went to Texas to do field there as well. And we left a very strong infrastructure of people who knew how to use the voter file. And when I was in Texas, you know, I called up a friend in California and said, we need you guys to make phone calls. We're in Texas. We're organizing for the caucus. And in one weekend, they could make 100,000 phone calls because they knew how to use the voter file, which was the same one that we had used, same interface. So I left a group of people, a lot of people in California who knew how to use this technology without any staff. And that's really, really powerful. You know, they were trained on how to use this stuff. And they still are to this day. And California actually ended up making literally millions and millions of phone calls into other battleground states throughout the general election.
And I'd just add quickly that, you know, on Super Tuesday, one of the reasons why we were so successful in the caucus states was we had folks who were literally organizing themselves for a year. You know, the day that BarackObama.com launched, when he launched his presidential campaign, there were 1,000 groups that were created that night, you know, including, you know, Idaho for Obama, which is still a very active group, and which ended up being one of the core elements of how we won Idaho by like 30 points or something like that. Because these folks already knew each other, were already pounding the pavement, hitting the streets, and other campaigns, they dropped in there maybe a month or two beforehand, and created an office. They had to find new volunteers. Our folks were already there. Easy to find.
To that point, we can't forget that the traditional organizing, the face-to-face contact, never. You have to have it. You can't rely only on the technology. You have to have also the face-to-face contact. The way that I think of online technologies is it's the net. It's not the engine.
I want to go to Cyrus next, and then to Jeff, because I think Jeff's going to have probably a broader perspective than anybody else on the stage.
It's because I'm old.
Because you're older than us all. But Cyrus, I wanted to ask, you tried this experiment basically at the RNC where you put the party platform online and you asked for comments and suggestions on the platform, really just original ideas from supporters, and you get 13,000 comments, right? I'm curious, is there any usable way to take stock of that commentary, and do you think that people felt like they were therefore more invested in the legislation? And particularly because if we look forward to government, there's this idea that we might put legislation online, that we might ask for ideas in the way that the administration is and other congressmen and senators. Well, curious what lessons you got from that we could think about for government.
Sure. First, thanks for having me. I think what I'd like to put on the record first and foremost is Buffy had more people in California than I had on my entire internet staff for the election cycle. We had, between the McCain campaign and RNC combined, we probably had a total of 15, 20 people compared to, 130?
You thought you had it tough.
I know.
140. So it was a little bit of David and Goliath there. And for you bloggers in the room, if you want to ask my boss for more resources, I wouldn't oppose that. So we tried something innovative for the first time in the nation's history. Regardless of political party, we invited user submissions for the party platform, which was ratified in Minneapolis during our convention. And we had over 160,000 people that came to the site. Majority of them were just reading comments. But we received a lot of submissions. And in order to submit a comment, you had to provide us with your data, email address, postal address, et cetera. And then there were about 8 different categories that you could comment on. So what we've done with that information is, beyond incorporating it into the platform, is identify what issues people care about and what they were commenting on, and append that information to our voter data so that we can create a more holistic understanding of these individuals and what they care about, and then deploy them in future cycles into the field. If you go to GOPplatform2008.com, you'll see that it wasn't just the fact that we were inviting submissions, but we actually read all of those. You could upload video via YouTube.
So you read every of the 13,000 comments, you read every single?
All of those were read, digested, and then provided to the platform committee that reviewed them during a week-long process in Minneapolis. And if you go to GOPplatform2008.com, you'll see that user submissions are actually incorporated into the living, breathing document. So,
did you learn anything from that? I mean, was there somebody that had an idea that the guys in the room might not have thought of until you opened it up?
Well, I think at the time gas was $4.50 a gallon, and in the traditional platform process, if you want to have your voice heard, if you live in South Dakota, there's a chance you may have to get in your car and drive 5 hours to go to the hearing, then hope that you get a chance to speak at the mic, and then hope that your comments are incorporated into the platform. So there's a lot of hope, different type of hope. But what we found is that people really wanted to engage and participate, and we broke down those barriers, whether it was geographic or whatever, to allow them to participate.
And do you think people cared that their ideas might be incorporated into the platform, or was it more just they wanted to know you were listening to what they were saying? Or is it both? I mean, I guess, what's the expectation of somebody who goes to that platform and submits a comment?
I think it's both. I think there was probably some skepticism at the outset as to whether or not we were actually going to read and incorporate these comments into the platform, and we proved that out by doing so.
If you were President-elect Obama dealing with the same type of situation, looking for comments on legislation or on ideas, what lessons would you say, hey guys, we learned this from our experience, like you should think about these things when you do it?
If I was President-elect Obama.
Yeah, if you were President-elect Obama, how would you change it?
You're really going to like that plane.
I'm going to punt on that one.
Okay, cool. Jeff, you've been using the internet in public life and in communication for much longer than anybody else on the stage. And back in the early 90s, you told me before the panel you were working on the Clinton healthcare plan. The internet existed at the time.
9 longest months of my life.
You know, the internet existed back then, but certainly the internet with its 2.0 capabilities didn't. I mean, do you think that your experience politically back then would have been different if there had been these tools to engage people? Or?
I do. I think what we tried to accomplish in 93, had we had the tools that Sam and Buffy and Cyrus outlined here this morning, we would have had a different playing field, and in some respects a more level playing field. There was some similarities in that in the early 90s there was a desire for some kind of change in healthcare. It was hard to get that manifested up here to ultimately those who were going to make the final decision from a policy standpoint. And so the filters were far greater in 93 and 94 than they are today. The amount of access that we could have used in Web 2.0, then we did have the web, but it was Web 0.5. And would the outcome have been different? I don't know. I don't know that it would have been different. The dialogue would have been far more robust. The discussion would have been far more fulsome. It could have changed the outcome, but it would have been a radically different environment for change for healthcare in 93 had we had the tools that we do today. We did the best that we could. We failed, and thankfully that debate is going to be taken up again, hopefully in the near future.
So as you're saying, because you can go straight to voters and marshal support in new, more efficient ways, that would have been the difference?
I think we would have been able. I think there was the same type of hunger has been outlined here today for the ability to look at things in a broader format, as opposed to small bites with filters and others' comment. If we could have done a better job or been able to provide the details of the plan and the rationale behind the plan and the messaging behind the plan in a broader platform, we might have succeeded more than we did in 93. People wanted change. They were hungry for details. It was a challenge to get the details in a more fulsome standpoint out there, and those barriers are way low now, and it would have changed the debate a lot.
You know, it's interesting. The media played a big role in that fight back in the early 90s with the Herald and Maude, is that what it was? The TV commercials that were out there. What Buffy and Sam, and I'm sure Cyrus will say today, and I'm sure yourself with your experience, is that now with technology you can go straight to voters.
Right.
I wonder, though, what you think of the role of the media today. We talk a lot about accountability and transparency with the government putting information online, being transparent. Buffy and Sam and Cyrus would say, well, we were able to go around the media during this election to engage people, but the media is still a pretty powerful force here. What role do you see the media playing here?
They are, and I have always said this is not, and nor should this debate ever be defined as an either-or equation. It is not. Mainstream media has a valuable place at the table. They will continue to be, but there is an in addition to piece of that equation, and it is what you saw manifested in the campaign in 2000. As has been said here, people want the opportunity to look at things in an unfiltered way. They also truly do want people who are smart and thoughtful to give advice and commentary on from the other perspective. So the two go together. They're not in conflict and they're not at odds. And the debate shouldn't be about that. It should be about how you can make government more transparent and more open without saying the mainstream media is irrelevant. They have a challenge on their hands, and that's been pretty well defined. But give people the opportunity in a robust way to look at the details of a plan, to hear the campaign, to hear the president in his or her entirety. Let people make their decisions. Let people also comment on their own thinking.
Cyrus?
I actually think that debate has a short shelf life because we're in an intermediary period now between mainstream media and the blogosphere, the web, and in the not too distant future, you're going to see the monitors converge, and the TV screen and the computer screen will be one and the same, and the central nervous system is I think going to put what today perceived as mainstream media in a different light. You see, the web publishers partnering with media companies and trying to figure out how IPTV and all this plays into the same hands. So I suspect that they're going to be interoperable, so to speak, in the not too distant future.
Interesting. I want to open up for questions to the crowd. There's a couple of mics here in all three aisles, so please make your way as soon as you have a question. First, I want to go to Google Moderator. This is the tool I referenced earlier where we took questions from people online and they vote the best ones up to the top. Incidentally, this is the same platform that the administration is using right now for their Open for Questions platform on change.gov. Some of the top voted questions actually are probably more applicable to Andrew's panel, which will be coming up in a bit, but we did dig deeper into the file to pull out a couple that were, I think, more relevant for our guests here today. One of them came all the way from Budapest, Hungary, actually, from a gentleman named, or I don't know if it's a gentleman or a woman, actually, but Kapani Varga is the person's name. And the question was, what decisions do you think would be made more wisely by citizens? For example, do you think a new environmental policy would be accepted sooner with a participative decision-making than in the past? So are there certain types of decisions that would be made more wisely by the group than by one person? Buffy, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I think just reflecting back on our experience when I was organizing in California with the teams model, we really focused on making them the campaign in their community. And is that collaboration and them working together and developing a circle of trust and more minds together on the same problem that really, I think, enhanced our program. And of course, the tech piece, was crucial. I'm a huge fan of the teams model of organizing, and so related to the question, of course, I think more minds on one problem would be beneficial, and the technology now enables us to do that. I know on the campaign, and Sam might be able to speak more to this than I, but with our policy groups, we had a reciprocatory for information on the policy ideas that we had on the campaign. And our policy teams took that very, very seriously. And people were submitting policy ideas all the time. And much like what you guys did with your platform, it was a way for people to engage on an intellectual level with the campaign. And I know that a lot of that stuff was incorporated into what ended up becoming a lot of our platform ideas.
It's interesting, though, because there's a difference between, I suppose, organizing around an already set strategy and just mobilizing people around ideas that already are set in place versus organizing and then taking sort of the feedback of that group and making that part of where you had.
Right, but the sort of structure that we developed in California was simply an avenue by which people can get involved. And it was their own creativity and their creative process that really enabled them to become powerful.
I think the answer is no. I can't think of any issue that wouldn't benefit from that.
Right.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that question? Let's go to a real human question, and then maybe we'll back to Moderator. Sir?
Good morning, Wyatt Cash with Government Computer News. One of the interesting things we'll be watching is the move from a campaign mode to a governing mode. And I think one of the symbolic gestures of what's different is President-elect Obama having to give up his BlackBerry. So I'm kind of curious how you feel the huge amount of information you were able to collect and interact with in a campaign mode. How does that get translated as the Obama team moves into government and suddenly deals with many statutory limits on their ability to communicate back?
Jeff, is that a good one for you?
It is a huge challenge as someone who, like a couple of others in this room who I recognize have had their emails read back before them in front of a federal grand jury. It is a huge challenge. You have such immense freedom in a campaign in both speed and how you can move information that gets unbelievably throttled down the day you set foot in a government bureaucracy. And it's not just the bureaucracy in terms of the people, but it's the structure in terms of how the various pieces and parts of government actually function. I would, we lived some of this in a way, in a much smaller way in '93, and found that our ability to to be creative and do things in a different way took far longer to ramp up and scale up than we ever would have liked, partly because of limits on technology, but partly because of limits on put on us by regulation and restriction. The challenge is you have to go in there, I think, every day, fight for what got you there, and fight for how you can continue that more openness in terms of communication, and you really got to be committed to beating on the system to open it up. The system needs to be opened up, and more people need access to government in a broader way. They are fundamentally, philosophically bound up that way. The challenge will be to not let this town beat them down in order to execute that, at least in a partial way from what they did on the campaign. You can't duplicate what you did on the campaign, but you got to go in every day and fight for it.
Any other thoughts?
I've just noticed a shift in behavior between the campaign and the office of President-elect in terms, I guess, since this panel is about transparency, specifically the decision that was made in terms of allowing comments and rating on YouTube videos during the campaign, but then not allowing it, and wondering if that was just a message decision or there's an actual legislative rationale behind that in terms of the office of the President-elect. I'm not trying to be difficult. It's a fundamental change in behavior of how the web's been used that flipped overnight, and I don't know what the rationale for that was.
Well, I can speak to the. Is this working? In terms of the content, which is what I sort of focus on. I mean, if you look at change.gov, I think the tone of the content is actually similar in the way that supporters' voices are elevated. I mean, throughout the campaign, we took stories of ordinary people, and we're still doing that. I mean, a lot of the content is, asking people to share their, American stories. So I think, while you're probably going to see a lot of differences, in terms of the technical areas and execution of things, I think the tone has stayed very much. This is larger than Barack Obama. This is about the American people coming together as a movement for change.
Let's focus on this for a second, because there's a user named, I guess, Kevin from DC who is asking about comments and discussions online, and he asks, how do we overcome the danger of creating echo chambers in online discussions? And are people just sort of talking, or how do we make sure that talking actually becomes valuable? I mean, I'm sure your blog posts were just sort of lines and lines and lines of comments. Is there a danger that it becomes an echo chamber?
Meaning?
I guess just meaning that it's sort of this circular discussion that people are just sort of talking and not actually
it wasn't
constructing
always, we basically allowed anyone who wanted to create a blog and create a group. And it wasn't always, rah-rah Obama. One of the most highly visible example of that was when there was a protest group created around FISA. There was never a question that we were going to allow, that group to exist and grow, and it grew to about 20,000 people. It got some media attention, we took it seriously, and Barack Obama wrote a note to these supporters. He wasn't going to change his position because they protested on the site. But he told them that he respected their their opinion, and that he was going to continue to listen. I think that actually really set a good tone going forward for the ability for folks to dissent even on our actual site.
Did you want to say something on that?
There was dissension, with some of the groups out there, and they voiced that on the blogs. And then, as a staff person, it made me aware of what was going on the ground and how to deal with situations and address situations quickly. It wasn't, all, flowers and babies and puppies all the time. There was some definite, they would have frustrations with this, that, or the other. And
they all wanted yard signs.
They all wanted yard signs. Everyone wanted yard signs. And so that bubbling up made us, allowed us to react much more quickly on it.
Let's go over here.
I'm Samir. I'm with the Human Rights Campaign, and I'm curious to ask Cyrus, how do you handle conflict in the comments that were provided on the platform either between other commenters or maybe radical or significant departures to the existing platform?
Yeah, thanks, Samir.
Sure.
Everything was published, and we welcomed dissenting viewpoints and that debate. The only comments that were removed were those that just were so unacceptable we couldn't have them in the experience. But I think of the submissions, I think 98% of them appear on the site. I'm sorry, did that answer the question?
Sort of. I mean, maybe not that they're necessarily abusive, or I mean, just if they represent a departure from what the traditional Republican Party platform might say.
Oh, okay.
How do you handle?
So I think it was a bold step for the party to actually welcome comments for the Republican platform from Democrats, Libertarians, Greens, whomever. We were not matching user accounts against our voter file to validate that they were our supporters before a submission was approved. It was completely open and welcome. And in fact, we've taken the same platform, reskinned it now at republicanforareason.com, and rebuildtheparty.com is another effort on a Ning platform. But in the same case, Democrats can come and tell the Republicans how to rebuild the party.
Let's go over.
I'm sure you do.
Let's go over here.
Yes, my name is Yvonne. I'm with Fresenius Medical Care. Buffy, I have a question for you in reference to your process of organizing your field and your teams. How could a company use that kind of process, that participatory process, in engaging in, for example, the healthcare reform issue, getting their employees to understand the issue, to participate openly in blogs or through other media, to be able to educate them on what is happening in Washington and how their input can help in translating participation in government for healthcare reform.
And you're talking about your employees?
Yes,
Yeah.
employees.
I think, the whole premise of our model was based on really training folks and giving them the information and the skill set to be successful with whatever they were going to do. And so we did a lot of weekend-long trainings with folks on how to use these technologies and how to be successful and how to use traditional organizing together. And I think with your staff, one thing you may want to do is do team discussion groups about whatever particular topic that you're working on, with the end result being some sort of shared Google Doc. By the way, this campaign relied so much on shared Google Docs. I don't know what we would have done without it. It was really, really crucial to what we were doing because it allowed everyone to have open access and input information together collectively on one document. So that might be a way that you could give that information to your folks and get them engaged in a more serious way.
One follow-up question, and this is in terms of regulations. The real people that need to participate are the patients. Obviously getting feedback in clinics and hospitals and those kinds of things, but the regulations really won't allow us to go out and get their participation because of privacy issues. Can any of you speak to that particular point?
There's a great website called askapatient.com that is user-generated submissions. I just stumbled across it recently, but it's just participatory submissions. Not even, I think it's managed by a woman out of her home. But these are the sorts of applications and platforms that are being developed at the household level that communities are rallying around. And I'm not.
But by the way, I just want to mention, I know the time's running out, but this weekend actually, there's going to be House meetings generated by folks like you all across the country. And this is a pretty critical thing. This is the first major nationwide grassroots event that's going to be happening, that's happened since the campaign ended. And the point of these meetings is for you guys to decide basically what the future of this movement that was built throughout the course of the last 2 years is going to be. The point of these meetings is for you guys to discuss the issues that are impacting your communities and collectively decide on community projects to work on. So I'd encourage you guys, even for curiosity's sake, to go attend one of these parties and be a part of that conversation.
Steve,
Just interrupt for 1 second on the health question. Google is running a pilot project with the Cleveland Clinic in which we have figured out a way for the patients, the doctors, and so forth to all come together in a way that does not in any way violate HIPAA. In fact, is way above the HIPAA standards.
Yeah.
That's great.
Right here in the middle.
Deborah Gersh Hernandez with Sunshine Week, and I wanted to ask someone on the panel to address the issue of transparency and true government openness versus using the web as another communications tool. Is putting a campaign video or a staged campaign event online really open government, or do we need to get to tax returns, health reports, and other really, more substantive issues online?
Jeff, what is?
I'm not sure I understand the distinction. This distinction there. I think if every time the president goes out and speaks, to give the people the ability to hear that speech in its entirety is a very good thing. I'm not sure I understand where you're going in terms of, you want the president's tax returns online?
Well, it's the difference between using another vehicle of communications. They can watch the speech on television, C-SPAN carries it online, putting it on the web is great and gives more people access. Nobody's saying it's not a good thing. But is that truly open government or just another communications tool for the campaign and for the administration?
Creep, crawl, walk, run.
I'm sorry, repeat.
Creep, crawl, walk, run. You can't go from a standing start to a full run on day one. I do think there's opportunities to do more openness in government, but I'm having trouble understanding the difference between putting events and making content available in a more robust, fulsome way than it is today. C-SPAN does a lot, but they're not always in real time, and they're not always, people don't have the ability necessarily to watch things in its entirety. I think it's hugely incumbent upon this president to go out and make those kinds of content decisions in their entirety available to the American people and let them judge whether the policies are on track or off track, and then comment back and give feedback.
But is there something?
I think the questioner is asking the same thing I was trying to address earlier, which is why during the campaign were comments welcome on Obama's YouTube videos, and now on his Sunday morning YouTube address are comments not welcome. It's a step backwards in terms of transparency and open government and allowing users to converse and pose thoughts on what they just heard from the President-elect's radio address. Is that?
Just like to make a clarification. Right now, currently, you can't comment on videos on. Just making a clarification. You can comment on videos on the Change.gov YouTube channel and MSN channel and Yahoo channel, as well as comment anonymously on Change.gov directly.
Does that include the Sunday morning YouTube addresses?
Correct.
Okay, thanks. That's a
Unless
recent change.
Change it midstream or something.
You're hearing it from the source. That guy works the base.
Excellent.
Oh, really? Okay. I think we actually have time for just one more question before we go on to the second panel. Sir, what's your question?
My name is Dennis McDonald. I'm a blogger. I have a question about if there's any concern about the cost of the senior professional time necessary to seriously go through large volumes of text. In reading about how the text is being read and reviewed and synthesized, people are taking it very seriously. Is that something that is going to be kept up with, or are we faced with the likelihood that we're going to end up with more quantitative and structured surveys as a way of interacting?
So it's a capacity question. I mean,
You mean dealing with the user-generated content in terms of the volume of text?
There's a large volume of content
Right.
and comments,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking about the health questions that were posted a couple of weeks ago. And the
3,700
weekends,
comments, yeah.
and the weekend of staff time that was spent. Is that something that's going to
Well, I think
have to happen all the time?
one of the ways that the transition folks are dealing with that is allowing users to vote and leaving the work to the folks out there, so that they're the ones deciding what the best content and the best questions are. So it both makes our lives easier, but also it's a more democratic, open process.
I think with that, we'll have to end this panel here and thank our guests, Jeff and Sam and Cyrus and Buffy, for taking time with us this morning. Give them a round of applause. And we'll invite Andrew and the second panel to come up momentarily. We'll come back in, say, 5 minutes. Thanks.